It was just an ordinary day for 12-year-old Malik when he found it, lying in the gutter, a sleek black wallet that seemed out of place. He could have walked past it, could have kept it, but something about the situation didn't sit right with him. A sudden wave of responsibility washed over him, and without hesitation, Malik picked up the wallet. Little did he know that this simple act would soon spiral into something much bigger than he could have ever imagined. Malik, like so many kids in his neighborhood, had dreams, big ones. But the reality of his life was far different from what he envisioned. Growing up in a tough part of town, every day was a struggle. There were broken homes, violence, and a constant battle to make it out. But Malik, he was different. He was smart, driven, and always tried to do the right thing. Even when it seemed easier to follow the crowd, he didn't. That morning after school, Malik was walking home when he spotted the wallet. His first instinct? To keep it. After all, who would ever know? But then he remembered the words his grandmother had always said to him: do the right thing, no matter the cost. So, with that guidance in his heart, he decided to take it to the address on the ID inside. The name on the card was Mr. Richard Lawson, a millionaire businessman known for his philanthropic work. Malik didn't know much about him, but he'd heard people around town mention his name, usually in the same breath as words like wealthy or powerful. Malik made his way to the address, trying to ignore the feeling of dread creeping in. What if the man didn't even appreciate it? What if the whole thing backfired on him? But as he rang the doorbell, he couldn't shake the hope that maybe, just maybe, this would lead to something good. When Mr. Lawson answered the door, Malik was taken aback. The man was older, with sharp eyes and a welcoming smile. At first, there was a brief moment of awkwardness, but then, with a quick glance at the wallet Malik was holding out, the tension dissolved. Mr. Lawson invited him in, offered him a drink, and praised him for his honesty. He even said Malik had restored his faith in humanity. It was a moment that Malik would never forget. The millionaire was so grateful that he promised Malik a reward, something that could change his life. Malik didn't expect anything in return, but the gesture felt good. For the first time in a long while, Malik felt like his actions could actually matter. But hours later, something unexpected happened. At school the next morning, as Malik sat in his history class, a pair of uniformed police officers walked in. They looked around the room before spotting him, and their eyes locked onto his. The tension in the air was palpable. Malik's heart started racing as he tried to figure out what was going on. He hadn't done anything wrong. He hadn't even taken the wallet, just returned it. So why were they here? Why were they looking at him like he was guilty of something? The officers didn't say much as they approached him, their footsteps heavy on the floor. They simply motioned for him to stand up. With a mix of confusion and fear, Malik obeyed, unsure of what was about to happen. As he walked out of the classroom, whispers followed him. His classmates exchanged nervous glances, and Malik's stomach sank. This wasn't how he imagined his life going after doing the right thing. And just when he thought things couldn't get worse, one of the officers turned to him and said, "We need to ask you a few questions." The world felt like it was closing in on him. How had a simple good deed led to this? Was he in trouble for returning the wallet? Was Mr. Lawson involved somehow? The unanswered questions piled up as Malik was escorted out of the school building, unaware of what he would face next. What had started as a small act of honesty was quickly turning into something far more complicated. As Malik sat in the back of the police car, his mind raced. The millionaire who had seemed so kind had something changed. What did the officers want from him? Was he really in danger? The tension continued to rise, and everything that Malik thought he knew about right and wrong, about the world around him, was being turned upside down. How far would this story go? Would Malik's choice to return the wallet end up costing him everything? The answers, as it turns out, would be more shocking than anyone could have imagined. Malik sat in the back of the police car, the cold metal seat pressing against his legs. His mind raced, but he couldn't make sense of anything. The officers hadn't told him anything. They hadn't explained why they were taking him away or what he'd done wrong. Every bump in the road felt like a hammer to his chest. The sky outside was overcast, and Malik couldn't help but think about how the day had started so differently, with hope in his heart and a simple act of honesty that now felt like the biggest mistake of his life. As they pulled into the precinct, Malik's stomach churned. His whole world had just been flipped upside down. He had no idea why the police were involved, but the nagging feeling that he was somehow in trouble wouldn't leave. He was just a kid from a rough neighborhood who had done something good. Was this how the world worked? Did good deeds lead to punishment? Malik had grown up with the understanding that his actions mattered. His grandmother had always told him that. She had raised him after his mother passed away and his father was never around. They lived in a small apartment in a neighborhood where opportunities were few and danger was everywhere. His grandmother worked as a janitor at a local high school, and although they didn't have much, they always made do. She made sure Malik stayed focused on school, taught him the value of hard work, and instilled in him a deep sense of respect for others. But life wasn't easy. Malik knew that. There were always whispers on the street about who was involved in what, and he'd seen enough to know how easy it could be to slip into the wrong crowd. It was easy to get distracted by the noise of the world, but Malik had tried his best to stay out of trouble. He didn't want to end up like some of the other kids he knew, lost in the system or caught up in things he couldn't escape. He wanted more. He wanted something better for himself. The encounter with Mr. Lawson had felt like a turning point. It wasn't just about returning a wallet. It was about doing something good, something that might change his life. The way Mr. Lawson had looked at him, the gratitude in his eyes, it had made Malik feel like maybe, just maybe, there was hope. Maybe there was a way out of the life he knew. The promise of a reward, though Malik hadn't asked for one, had seemed like an opportunity. An opportunity to finally get a step closer to the life he wanted. But now, he wasn't sure what to think anymore. As the car came to a stop, the officers finally spoke. "Stay here," one of them said gruffly before opening the door. Malik felt a lump form in his throat. His legs shook as he followed them into the building. His mind was spinning. What was going on? What did they think he had done? Inside, the precinct was buzzing with activity. There were officers moving quickly through the hallways, some talking in hushed tones, others shouting orders. Malik's mind felt like it was being pulled in every direction. He had no idea why he was here or what was going to happen next. They brought him into a small, stark room and told him to sit at a table. The room smelled like coffee and bleach, with no windows and a single dim light overhead. The officers left him alone for what felt like hours, though it was probably only minutes. The silence in the room was deafening. Every creak of the floorboards, every muffled conversation outside seemed to magnify the tension. Malik thought about what happened after he left Mr. Lawson's house. The man had thanked him profusely, even giving him a ride home. Malik remembered how nervous he had felt when he first walked up to the massive house. It was bigger than anything he'd ever seen. But once inside, the atmosphere had been different. Mr. Lawson was kind, and Malik felt like he was being treated like an adult for the first time in his life. They had talked for a while, and Mr. Lawson had asked him about school, about his life. He listened. It had felt good. But now, Malik couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Why had the police come for him? Why had they shown up at school? And why did he feel like the situation was quickly spinning out of control? His thoughts were interrupted by the door opening, and two officers entered the room. One of them, a tall man with a square jaw and steely eyes, sat across from Malik and gave him a long look. "Where's the money, Malik?" he asked bluntly. Malik blinked, confused. "What money?" "The money in the wallet you found. Where is it?" Malik's mind went blank. I didn't take any money," he stammered. "I just brought the wallet back. That's all." The officer leaned forward, his voice lowering. "We know about the cash in that wallet. Mr. Lawson says there was a significant amount of money in it. We're trying to figure out what happened to it. You're the last person who had it." Malik felt his chest tighten. He didn't know what the officer was talking about. There hadn't been any cash in the wallet when he found it, at least not that he had seen. There was just an ID, a few credit cards, and a business card for Mr. Lawson, but nothing that seemed valuable or out of the ordinary. "Listen, I didn't steal anything," Malik said, his voice shaking. "I just gave it back to him. I didn't take any money. I swear." The officer sat back, crossing his arms. "And you expect us to believe that? A kid from your neighborhood just happens to find a wallet belonging to one of the wealthiest men in town, and he decides to return it without taking anything. That doesn't add up, Malik." The words hit Malik like a punch to the gut. He'd been trying to do the right thing, but now he was being treated like a criminal. He could feel the weight of their suspicion pressing down on him. This wasn't the way he had imagined things would go. He had tried to do something good, something that would make his grandmother proud. But now he was trapped in a situation he didn't understand. As the officer continued questioning him, Malik's thoughts raced. What was really going on? Why was Mr. Lawson acting so nice one minute and now this? Did he know something Malik didn't? Had he lied about the wallet? The questions swirled in his mind, but every answer felt more confusing than the last. The longer they kept him there, the more the sense of dread grew. He wanted to go home, to talk to his grandmother, to try to make sense of all this. But the more he sat in that cold room, the more he realized that nothing about this situation was simple. He didn't know it yet, but the truth was far more complicated than he could have imagined, and the mystery of the wallet was only the beginning. Malik's heart pounded in his chest as the officer's gaze bore into him. His words kept echoing in Malik's mind. Asterisk, that doesn't add up, Malik. Asterisk. The more the officer pressed, the more the room felt like it was closing in on him. The stark, white walls seemed to be getting smaller, the fluorescent light above buzzing relentlessly. He had never felt so powerless, so misunderstood. He hadn't done anything wrong, yet somehow, here he was, caught in a web he couldn't untangle. As the officer continued to question him, Malik's thoughts drifted to Mr. Lawson. The man had seemed so genuine, so kind when he'd handed the wallet back. What had changed? Why were the police suddenly involved? And why did it feel like everyone was assuming he had done something wrong, when all he had done was return what wasn't his? It didn't make sense. Back in his neighborhood, Malik had seen how quickly things could go sideways. People made assumptions based on appearances, based on where you came from. He knew the world didn't always see him as he saw himself. And right now, he couldn't shake the feeling that his race, his background, and the fact that he lived in a struggling part of town were all factors in the way the situation was unfolding. Did they see him as a kid who could do no right, no matter what? He was jolted out of his thoughts when the door to the interrogation room opened again. This time, it wasn't an officer who walked in, but a woman in a sharp suit. She had a professional air about her, the kind of person who didn't waste words. She sat down without even acknowledging Malik and immediately turned her attention to the officer. "Any progress?" she asked, her voice calm but commanding. The officer shifted uncomfortably. "Not much, ma'am. The kid keeps insisting he didn't take anything, but something's off. We need more to go on." The woman nodded slowly, then turned her eyes on Malik. Her gaze was calculating, almost as if she was sizing him up, and for a moment, Malik felt like a specimen under a microscope. "Malik, right," she said, her tone even but with an underlying sharpness. "I'm Agent Williams. I'm here to help get to the bottom of this." Malik didn't know what to think. Another person, another figure of authority. But what could she really do? She wasn't going to take his side, was she? He could feel the coldness in the air between them. "I didn't do anything," Malik said again, his voice barely a whisper. "I just brought the wallet back. That's it." Agent Williams didn't flinch. She simply nodded, as if she had already heard it all before. "I'm sure you did, Malik. But you understand how these things work, right? A wallet doesn't just disappear. People don't come forward to return something unless there's a reason. It's hard to believe it's as simple as you're making it out to be." Malik's stomach dropped. He wanted to shout, to tell her she was wrong, but he knew it wouldn't help. She wasn't listening to him. She was listening for something else, something hidden. As the interrogation continued, Malik's mind drifted again, this time back to the moment when he first returned the wallet to Mr. Lawson. There had been a brief exchange. Mr. Lawson had thanked him profusely, talked about how rare it was to find someone with integrity these days, and how that kind of honesty would take Malik far in life. The man had even asked if Malik wanted anything in return, some reward, some opportunity to help him get ahead in life. Malik had turned it down, not wanting to look like he was after money or fame. But the kindness had been overwhelming, almost too much to believe. What if Mr. Lawson hadn't been as sincere as he seemed? What if there was something else going on? The way the officers were speaking now, it felt like Malik was being blamed for something he hadn't done. But the question nagged at him. Asterisk why? Asterisk, what was the hidden truth that no one was telling him? Just then, his phone buzzed in his pocket. It was a text from his grandmother. Asterisk, where are you? I've been trying to reach you. You're scaring me. Asterisk. His heart sank. He knew he had to explain everything to her. Asterisk everything, asterisk. But he couldn't do it now. He didn't have the answers, and he wasn't even sure if he'd be allowed to leave. It wasn't just the police that had him in a bind. It was the weight of all the uncertainty, the growing sense that this was more than just a misunderstanding. Something bigger was at play, and Malik didn't know if he could handle it. Meanwhile, across town, Mr. Lawson was sitting in his expansive office, looking out over the city's skyline. His phone buzzed, and he glanced at the incoming message. It was a brief note from his assistant. Asterisk. The police are questioning the boy. They're pressing him about the wallet. They think he took something. Asterisk. Richard Lawson sighed, rubbing his temples. He had never expected things to unfold like this. He had wanted to reward the boy for doing the right thing, for showing integrity in a world that often didn't value it. But now his involvement was being questioned, and it was clear that the situation was escalating in ways he couldn't control. What had he gotten himself into? For a moment, Lawson considered picking up the phone and calling the police, explaining everything. But then he hesitated. What if doing so only made things worse for Malik? The last thing he wanted was for the boy to get caught in the crossfire of a situation that had nothing to do with him. Still, there were too many unanswered questions. Asterisk. Why would the police think Malik had taken something from the wallet? Asterisk. Lawson thought about his business dealings, the people he had crossed paths with in the past. There were some powerful figures in his world, people who had no tolerance for mistakes, especially when money was involved. Could someone be trying to frame the boy? Could this be part of some larger scheme to discredit him, to ruin his reputation for reasons he didn't understand? Back at the precinct, Malik was feeling the strain of the hours that had passed. He'd been questioned repeatedly, each round feeling more like an interrogation than a conversation. His answers were becoming more desperate, more defensive. Every time he explained that he hadn't taken anything, they'd pressed harder, trying to find a crack in his story. It wasn't just about the wallet anymore. It was about his character, about whether they believed him or not. And somewhere in the back of his mind, Malik wondered, was this really about a missing wallet? Or was there something deeper at play, something much more dangerous? Every moment in that room made him feel smaller, like the walls were closing in, like the world was shifting around him. He had no answers, just more questions. What had he gotten himself into? And more importantly, who could he trust now? The answers felt just out of reach, and the tension, the mystery, the fear, it only grew with each passing minute. The tension in the room was unbearable. Every tick of the clock seemed to echo in Malik's mind, each second dragging by as the officers continued to press him. He could feel his heart pounding in his chest, the tightness in his throat growing with each new question. His mouth was dry, and his words, though truthful, felt as though they were slipping further and further from the grasp of the people sitting across from him. No matter what he said, it wasn't enough. Agent Williams leaned forward, her sharp eyes never leaving Malik's face. You keep saying you didn't take the money, Malik, but there's something off about your story. You found a wallet. You returned it. But no one finds a wallet belonging to someone like Richard Lawson and doesn't take something. We've seen it all before. Malik's mind was spinning. He couldn't make sense of anything. The officers were determined to make him out to be a liar, to twist his words into something that fit their narrative. But what were they really after? Why were they fixating on the money? Malik hadn't seen any cash in that wallet, had seen only the ID, the credit cards, the business card for Mr. Lawson. But the police didn't seem interested in hearing that. They were obsessed with something else, something they weren't telling him. The door to the room opened suddenly, cutting through the silence. The officer who had been questioning Malik stood up abruptly, his chair scraping across the floor. Malik's heart skipped a beat. He hadn't expected any new developments, but it was clear something had shifted. The officer exchanged a few quick words with someone in the hallway, then returned to the room with an air of urgency. "Looks like we have something," the officer said, his voice cold. "Malik, we found the missing piece." Malik's stomach churned. Was this it? Was this where everything unraveled? The officer slid a manila folder across the table to Malik. Malik stared at it for a moment, then cautiously opened it, his hands shaking. Inside were several photos, pictures of Mr. Lawson's wallet, taken with precision. And in those photos, there were stacks of cash, clearly visible through the transparent plastic window of the wallet. Malik's eyes widened. He hadn't seen any cash when he picked up the wallet. Asterisk had it been taken after he left asterisk. Agent Williams leaned in, her voice low. "These pictures were taken after you left Mr. Lawson's house, Malik. That's the money we're talking about. And it's in your hands now. You're going to tell us where it is." Malik's mind raced, his thoughts whirling in all directions. How could this be happening? The man had given him a ride home, thanked him, treated him with kindness. And now this. He hadn't taken any money, but how could he prove it? Why would Mr. Lawson allow this to happen? The questions piled up, suffocating him. The officers were relentless now, their tone growing harsher, their words sharper. Malik's anxiety soared as they repeated their questions, demanding answers he didn't have. He kept telling them the same thing. Asterisk. "I didn't take anything. I just brought it back." Asterisk. But with each insistence, the officers seemed to dig in deeper, more convinced that he was hiding something. He tried to think, tried to piece together the events, the moments that felt so clear at first. But now they were clouded, filled with doubt. How could he have missed something like that? How could he have returned the wallet and not noticed the money? Had he really missed it, or was someone else involved? The minutes stretched into hours, and Malik felt himself losing grip on everything. The idea that his good deed had spiraled into this nightmare weighed heavily on him. It felt like a trap, but who was setting it? And why? Back at Mr. Lawson's mansion, the situation was just as tense. Richard Lawson sat at his desk, his fingers pressed against his temples. The evening had turned to night, but sleep was nowhere near. His thoughts were a storm of confusion and worry. He had been trying to make things right, to reward a boy who had shown a rare sense of integrity. Yet somehow, the situation had spun completely out of control. Lawson's assistant had brought him more news, this time about the police questioning Malik. The authorities were convinced the boy had taken money from the wallet, and now they were building a case against him. Lawson's heart sank. He'd never imagined things would go this far. What if Malik was in trouble because of him? What if he had inadvertently caused the boy to become a target? But there was more to it than that. Lawson couldn't shake the feeling that he was missing something important. The cash. The pictures the police had shown. He had made sure the wallet was empty when he received it back from Malik. There hadn't been a single dollar in it. But now they were saying the money was there, just waiting to be found. Who had planted the cash? Was someone trying to frame Malik? Was this all part of a bigger scheme? And who could he trust in all of this? As the weight of the situation pressed down on him, Lawson's thoughts turned to his own business dealings. He had enemies, people who wanted to take him down, people who would stop at nothing to ruin his reputation. Was this some kind of retaliation? Was someone trying to use Malik to destroy him? Back at the precinct, Malik was reaching his breaking point. The interrogation had become a blur, a never-ending cycle of accusations and demands for answers. He felt trapped, like he was sinking deeper into quicksand with no way out. Then, just when it seemed like he couldn't take any more, the door to the room opened again. A new figure stepped inside, a tall man in a dark suit, his face hidden in shadow. The officers paused, their attention turning to the newcomer. Malik didn't know who he was, but the room suddenly felt even colder, even more suffocating. "I've been briefed," the man said, his voice calm but authoritative. "I'll take it from here." The officers exchanged uneasy glances before nodding and stepping aside. Malik couldn't help but feel a sense of dread. Who was this man? What was going to happen next? The stranger approached Malik slowly, his eyes scanning the boy with an intensity that made Malik feel exposed. "You've had a rough day, haven't you?" the man said, his voice almost gentle. "But things are about to get a lot more complicated." Malik's mind raced as he tried to make sense of what was happening. The tension in the room was unbearable, and the weight of the unknown pressed down on him like never before. What had started as a simple act of honesty, a simple return of a lost wallet, was now spiraling into something much bigger, something dangerous. And the worst part, Malik didn't know who was behind it, or what the ultimate goal was. But one thing was certain: the stakes were higher than ever, and everything, his future, his reputation, his freedom, was on the line. The tall man in the suit stood across from Malik, his posture rigid, his gaze unwavering. There was something unsettling about the way he looked at Malik, as if he could see through him, as if he knew things that weren't meant to be known. Malik felt a chill run down his spine, the hairs on the back of his neck standing on end. "Sit down, Malik," the man said softly, but with an authority that left no room for protest. Malik hesitated for a moment, but his legs felt like jelly, and he sank into the chair in front of the man, feeling the weight of the situation press on him even harder. His thoughts were racing. Who was this guy? And why had he shown up now, just when things seemed to be spiraling out of control? The man placed a file on the table in front of Malik, the sound of the folder slapping against the wood echoing in the silence. "You're in a very dangerous situation," the man continued, his voice low but clear. "But I'm here to make sure it doesn't get worse." Malik's heart skipped a beat. Dangerous situation. What did that mean? He wanted to ask so many questions, but the man was already speaking again, his words cutting through Malik's thoughts. "I'm Special Agent Carter," the man said, as if the name alone should mean something. "I'm here to help you. But you need to understand something very clearly. This isn't about the wallet anymore." Malik's brow furrowed. If it wasn't about the wallet, then what was it about? The only thing he knew was that his entire world had been turned upside down in a matter of hours. First, returning a lost wallet had somehow led to him being questioned like a criminal, and now here was this man saying it wasn't even about the wallet anymore. Special Agent Carter paused, watching Malik carefully, letting the silence stretch between them like a taut wire. Then, without warning, he slid a photograph across the table. Malik's eyes locked on the image. It was a photo of a man, young, no older than Malik himself. The man was standing in front of a well-known building in the city, a place that Malik recognized. The man had a smug grin on his face, his hand resting casually in his pocket. But it wasn't the man's face that made Malik's blood run cold. It was the familiar shape of a wallet sticking out of his coat, almost identical to the one Malik had found. "That's the man we believe you were set up by," Carter said, his voice cold, as if he were delivering bad news. "He's been working with someone inside Lawson's circle to frame you. And this," he tapped the photo with his finger, "this is just the beginning." Malik stared at the photo, his mind striving to piece together what Carter was saying. He had been set up by someone he didn't even know. This man in the picture, the one who looked so confident, was somehow connected to the mess Malik had found himself in. But how and why? His name is Jordan Price, Carter continued, his voice steady. He's a small-time hustler, but he's got connections. People higher up than you or I will ever be. People who can make things disappear or create evidence where there is none. And now he's using you as a pawn in a much bigger game. Malik felt the room spinning. This couldn't be real, could it? He had just been trying to do the right thing. He had returned a wallet. And now this entire thing was somehow bigger than him. A setup, a pawn. His head was reeling, his pulse quickening as the weight of Carter's words settled into him. Carter's eyes softened slightly, but there was still an edge to his voice. Malik, listen to me. We don't have much time. If we don't move quickly, they'll make sure you take the fall for everything. They've planted evidence against you, and they'll use the police to back it up. The wallet, the money, it's all a distraction. They've been watching Lawson closely, and they're willing to do whatever it takes to take him down. You're just in the wrong place at the wrong time. Malik's hands were shaking now. His mind was spinning in 1,000 directions. Why would anyone want to frame him? He was just a kid from the neighborhood. Nothing special. But now it felt like he was being swept up in something much darker than he could ever have imagined. I don't understand, Malik said, his voice barely above a whisper. Why me? Why are they using me? Carter took a deep breath. Because you're a threat, Malik. You've got something they want, something Lawson values. You don't even realize it, but they've been watching you, keeping tabs on your movements. The way you returned that wallet, it made you a target. They saw your integrity as a weakness, something they could exploit. Malik's mind raced as he tried to process it all. He hadn't done anything wrong. He had only done what anyone else might do, return something they found. But now this simple act had somehow made him a pawn in a game that involved people far more dangerous than he could have ever imagined. I don't know what you're talking about, Malik said, his voice trembling. I didn't steal anything. I just wanted to do the right thing. I know you did, Carter said, his eyes softening for the first time. But sometimes, doing the right thing makes you a target. People like Jordan Price, they don't care about right or wrong. They only care about power and control. There was a long pause, and Malik could feel the weight of Carter's words pressing down on him. For a moment, everything felt still, as if the room itself was holding its breath. Then, Carter stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. Listen carefully, Malik, he said, his tone hardening again. I'm your only ally right now. If you don't trust me, you're going to end up in a lot of trouble, and it'll be too late before you even realize how deep you're in. They've got eyes everywhere, and if you don't move fast, they'll have you trapped in their web, and there won't be any way out. Malik felt his stomach tighten, fear coursing through him. His world had been turned upside down in a single afternoon, and now it seemed like the stakes were higher than ever. What had started as a simple good deed had become a dangerous game, one he had no control over. And the worst part, he still didn't know who to trust. As Carter turned to leave, Malik's thoughts raced. Was it too late to undo the damage? Could he clear his name before it was too late? But just as the door clicked shut behind Carter, Malik's phone buzzed in his pocket. His heart leaped into his throat as he pulled it out and saw the name on the screen. Asterisk Mr. Lawson asterisk. Before he could even think, he answered the call, his voice shaky. Mr. Lawson, what's going on? Why are the police involved? But before Lawson could respond, there was a sharp knock on the door, followed by the unmistakable sound of footsteps approaching rapidly. Malik's breath caught in his chest. He wasn't alone anymore, and whatever was about to happen next, it was coming for him. The knock at the door sent a jolt through Malik's entire body. His heart was racing, and his hands, still trembling from the whirlwind of events, were frozen in place. He could hear Mr. Lawson's voice, faint but urgent, on the other end of the phone, but the sound seemed distant now, drowned out by the pounding of his own heartbeat. The footsteps outside the door grew louder, closer. Malik stood up quickly, his mind racing. The reality of the situation was sinking in, each second dragging him deeper into a pit of uncertainty. Everything he thought he knew, everything he had believed about what was happening, was slipping away. What did it mean now that he had Mr. Lawson on the phone? Was Lawson somehow involved in the setup, or was he another victim of the same people who were targeting Malik? The door swung open, and in walked Special Agent Carter again, this time followed by 2 other officers. Malik's stomach dropped as Carter locked eyes with him, his expression unreadable. "Malik," Carter said, his voice calm but filled with tension. "We've been trying to piece this together, but it's time for the truth." Malik stood there confused. He had no idea what was going to happen next. Was this the moment they finally arrested him? Was it the moment they revealed that he had been caught in the middle of a much larger scheme? He braced himself for whatever came next. Then suddenly, everything shifted. The phone in Malik's hand buzzed again, and he glanced at the screen. It was Mr. Lawson's name again, but this time, the message was clear. "I know who did it. You're in danger. I'm coming for you." Malik's heart stopped. The weight of Lawson's words was crushing. It seemed that everything was connected in ways Malik couldn't have imagined. Mr. Lawson knew something but what? Why had he been so silent all this time? Before Malik could process it further, Carter spoke again, his voice sharp. "Malik, I know you've been trying to help, but there's more going on than you think. We've been following a trail, one that leads back to the people who've been manipulating everything from the start." Malik's head was spinning, but he tried to keep his focus. "Who are they? What do you mean? I don't understand." Carter looked at the other officers, then back at Malik, his face tightening. "It's bigger than just you. Someone's been using you, Malik. Someone who knows how to pull strings. But the person behind it all," Carter trailed off, as if he was trying to find the right words. "The person pulling the strings is someone who's been in plain sight all along." Malik's mind raced. He thought back to everything. The wallet, the ride home, the mysterious events that followed. It didn't make sense. Who could it be? Who was playing him? Suddenly, it hit him, the final piece of the puzzle falling into place. "Wait, are you saying it was Mr. Lawson?" Carter's eyes hardened, and a brief, almost imperceptible nod confirmed Malik's suspicions. Malik's stomach turned as the truth sunk in. Mr. Lawson, the very person who had seemed like an ally, had been orchestrating this entire situation. The gratitude he'd shown Malik, the promise of reward, the kindness, it had all been part of the plan. The real reason Lawson had been so interested in Malik wasn't about generosity, it was about control. The room seemed to spin as the weight of betrayal hit Malik with full force. The last person he would have ever suspected was the one who had set him up from the very beginning. Lawson had used him to cover his own tracks, manipulating him into unknowingly carrying out a plan that no one, least of all Malik, could have seen coming. "I had no idea," Malik whispered, the words barely escaping his mouth. "He set me up, to take the fall, but why?" Carter's gaze softened for a moment. "Lawson's involved in more than just business, Malik. He's in deep with some very dangerous people. He needed someone to take the heat for the stuff he's been hiding. Someone who had no idea what was going on. Someone like you." The finality of Carter's words hit Malik hard, but even as the truth became clear, another question lingered in his mind. But why would he involve me? Why not just cover his tracks on his own? "That's the real kicker," Carter said, a glint of recognition flashing in his eyes. He didn't just need a scapegoat. He needed an witness, someone who would vouch for his character, someone who had just been through a supposed act of kindness. "He used you, Malik, to make himself look good in the public eye. You were the perfect pawn." Malik's head was spinning. All of it, every moment, every gesture of kindness, every offer to help, was a carefully constructed ruse. Lawson had used Malik's good nature against him, manipulating him in the worst way possible. Before Malik could say anything else, there was another knock at the door. The officers exchanged quick glances, and Carter nodded at them. "Stay here," he said, his voice now hardened with resolve. "We're going to get to the bottom of this." As the officers left the room, leaving only Malik and Carter behind, the silence felt deafening. It was as if the world outside had stopped moving, waiting for something to break. And then, without warning, Carter pulled out his phone and glanced at the screen. His face went pale. The expression on his face was the last thing Malik expected. Carter's eyes widened, his jaw tightening as he looked from the phone to Malik. "Malik," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "this just got a whole lot worse." Before Malik could ask what he meant, Carter's phone rang again. It was Mr. Lawson. The call was answered before Malik could even think to stop it. Carter held up the phone, his face drained of color as he spoke. "Lawson," Carter said, barely keeping his voice steady. "What have you done?" There was a long pause before Lawson's voice came through, cold and sinister. "It's already done, Agent Carter. There's nothing you can do to stop it now." Malik's blood ran cold as he realized the full extent of what was happening. Mr. Lawson wasn't just trying to cover up his tracks, he had a much bigger plan in mind, and it was all coming to a head right now. The call ended abruptly, and the air in the room felt like it had turned to ice. Carter slowly lowered the phone, his face pale and drawn. "I'm sorry, Malik," he muttered. "I should have known. But you're not in the clear yet. This is just the beginning." Just as the door swung open once more, the final twist came. Malik had no idea that what he thought was the end of his nightmare was only the beginning of something much, much darker. The door creaked open once again, and this time it wasn't just Carter walking through. Malik's heart skipped a beat as two men in plain clothes stepped in, both of them holding badges, their expressions grim. These weren't ordinary officers. Something about them felt different, more ominous. The tension in the room thickened as the reality of the situation sank in deeper. Carter looked at the newcomers, then back at Malik, his expression unreadable. The silence in the room was deafening as everyone seemed to be waiting for something. "Agent Carter," one of the men said, his voice sharp, "we have a new development." Malik's stomach tightened. What could possibly be worse than what had already happened? But before he could ask, Carter nodded grimly, signaling for Malik to sit back down. The officers moved swiftly, closing the door behind them and locking it. The room felt even smaller now, with no escape, no way out of the situation Malik had been pulled into. The men exchanged a few quiet words, and one of them placed a folder on the table in front of Malik. This time, the file was thick, its contents weighty with whatever secrets it held. "Malik," Carter said, his voice low and serious, "the game's changed. Everything you thought you knew about Lawson, it's bigger than that, much bigger." Malik stared at him confused. He was trying to keep up with the information that had been piling up. But everything was moving so fast, and it was hard to keep track of who was involved and what the endgame was. He could feel the weight of the truth pressing down on him like a ton of bricks. Lawson had been using him all along, and now it seemed like the man was even more dangerous than Malik had thought. One of the officers in plain clothes handed Carter a set of photographs. Carter glanced at them briefly before sliding them over to Malik. Malik's breath caught as he recognized the faces in the photos, his own, taken at different angles, his image captured as he walked through the streets by the school, and in places he never thought anyone would be watching. "They've been tracking you," Carter said quietly. "Not just for a few days, but for months. They knew exactly what you were doing when you were doing it. They watched your every move. They know you're a threat." A threat? Malik could hardly believe what he was hearing. All of this was about him. How? Why? "The men in these pictures," Carter continued, "are part of a much larger operation. Lawson is involved in more than just shady business deals. He's working with people who've been pulling strings behind the scenes, controlling everything, making sure certain things stay hidden. The missing wallet, the money, it's all part of a much bigger plan." Malik's mind was racing, trying to piece everything together. It didn't make sense. How could one man, someone like Lawson, be connected to such a vast network of corruption? "What's the plan?" Malik asked, his voice hoarse. What are they after? Carter's eyes hardened as he leaned in, his voice grave. Lawson and his partners are trying to control the city's major assets, property, investments, political influence. And they've been using people like you, unsuspecting individuals, to cover up their illegal activities. The wallet, the bribes, it was all a distraction, a way to manipulate public perception. But you didn't just stumble into this, Malik. You were chosen. You were the perfect candidate for their scheme. The words hit Malik like a punch to the gut. He had been nothing more than a pawn in a game far larger than he could have ever understood. He had been a part of something sinister, all because he tried to do the right thing by returning a lost wallet. And now the truth was clearer than ever. Lawson was dangerous, and his reach extended farther than Malik had ever imagined. So what now? Malik asked, his voice barely a whisper. Carter looked him in the eye, his gaze full of urgency. Now we stop him. But you need to understand, Malik. You can't go back to your normal life. You can't trust anyone you thought you could. The people Lawson is connected to, his network, they won't stop until they've buried you, just like they've done with others before. Malik's mind was spinning. He had never wanted any of this. All he'd wanted was to do the right thing, to be a good person. But now he was stuck in a web of lies and corruption, with no clear way out. Where does that leave me? Malik asked, the weight of the situation finally starting to hit home. What do I do now? Carter paused for a long moment, the tension in the room palpable. It leaves you with a choice, Malik. You can walk away from this and hope they leave you alone. Or you can help us take Lawson down. But if you help us, you'll be in this for the long haul. This won't be over until we expose everything and everyone. Malik stared at Carter, his mind a whirlwind of thoughts. The fear and confusion was still there, but something else was starting to emerge: determination. He hadn't asked for any of this, but now he felt like he couldn't walk away. He had to finish this, for himself, for the people who had been manipulated, for the city that was still blind to the dangers lurking in the shadows. I'll help, Malik said, his voice steady. I'll do whatever it takes. Carter gave him a nod of approval, though his expression remained serious. I knew you had it in you. We'll need everything you've got. This is going to be bigger than we thought. As the officers moved to prepare for the next step in their operation, Malik found himself standing at the center of a storm that was only just beginning to unfold. But for the first time since this madness began, he felt a spark of hope. He wasn't just a victim anymore. He was part of something that could change everything. It wouldn't be easy, and the road ahead would be filled with danger. But Malik was ready. The city outside the window seemed peaceful, unaware of the battle that was quietly unfolding beneath its surface. But Malik knew that peace was only an illusion. The fight was coming, and he was no longer a bystander. As the officers left the room to prepare, Malik stood alone for a moment, taking a deep breath. The world had turned upside down, and he couldn't go back to what it was. But in that moment, Malik knew one thing for certain: the truth would come to light, no matter the cost, and he would be there to make sure it did. As the door shut behind him, Malik walked out into the unknown, ready to face whatever came next.